Hey, first off, I just want to thank D'Angela for inviting me, and it's always such an honor, and um, it's just so exciting to be here. So thank you so much for giving this space to all of us. So my talk is called Zoot Suits and New Jack Swing, Morris Day's Dandyism in Graffiti Bridge. All right. So in the 19th century, the French poet and art critic Charles Baudelaire describes the dandy as aspiring to be sublime without interruption. He must live and sleep before a mirror. And no one in the Prince universe is more synonymous with both the metaphoric and literal mirror than Morris Day. And he does not disappoint in Graffiti Bridge. Now, I've been thinking about Prince as a dandy for several years now, but I'd like to switch gears to look more closely at Morris Day and the time as dandies. Now, through sociocultural and historical analysis of Black dandyism, the Zoot suit, and the dance aesthetic and roots of New Jack Swing, I will dissect the philosophical underpinnings of sartorial rebellion as a profound statement of power and assertion of agency in Graffiti Bridge. All right, so what is a dandy exactly? We tend to recognize the dandy as an elegantly dressed person who really knows how to accessorize a suit or manipulate the traditional cut of a three-piece suit. As you can see here with the Congolese sapeurs in Brazzaville and Janelle Monáe, of course. But dandyism really goes beyond this superficial sartorial level when we acknowledge the power of clothing and image through historical contextualization of the dandy figure, as we see with these women. Author of Slaves to Fashion, Black Dandyism and the Styling of Black Diasporic Identity, Monica Miller describes it as, and I'm paraphrasing from her 2018 interview with Redressed, quote, not just about the clothing, but also the pointed deployment of gesture and wit, often a critical response to changing circumstances. And she analyzes the emergence of most of the iconic dandy figures at moments of historical change in social hierarchies as a figure who critiques previous norms and comments on future potential of those identities. The dandy's clothing and person is semiotic. They both interpret and are interpreted, and they are at once questioning and questioners. So although white scholars credit England's George Beau Brummel at the turn of the 19th century as the first dandy, Monica goes back to the 18th century and looks at the cultural turmoil related to political changes stemming from slavery, imperialism, equality, and revolution. So when outlining the origins of dandyism, she focuses on the powerful figure of the Black dandy in England, whose sartorial gestures of wit question the social order and hierarchy by using their own objectification and taking agency over it. Now, she begins with Julius Soubise, taken from Jamaica as a child in England to be an enslaved servant to the Duchess of Queensberry. He was given the most elaborate clothing, a quality education, music lessons, and was basically integrated into the Duchess's household as a luxury item himself. He was known for wearing diamond-buckled red shoes and would push social boundaries to the extreme in public places. For example, he would reserve the most expensive box at the opera and would walk to the park with all white footmen and really claim this space in a very subversive way. Miller then traces the roots of dandyism across the Atlantic to the colonial era African-American festivals, cakewalk performances, and minstrel shows during the 19th century, and subsequently to queer culture in Harlem and beyond. So to summarize, basically, a dandy is someone wearing an elegant suit with subversive styling as an expression of social rebellion and empowerment, and a tool for questioning racial, sexual, gendered, national, and class categories. All right, so while Prince's own fashion was rapidly evolving to a look that aligned well with this manipulation of the classic three-piece suit, during this time, he was also creating the time with frontman Morris Day. And you can see my analysis, very scientific, of Prince's evolution during this era. So he's creating the time with Morris Day, longtime friend and drummer from one of his first bands, Grand Central. And in Day's 2019 memoirs, he describes Prince's motivation behind creating the time, for which he wrote, produced, and played all instruments on the recorded albums, with Day's vocals on top. Quote, "It's one thing to compete with your peers. It's another thing to create competition from within your own camp. This was ego merging. Prince saw me as an extension of himself. I was his creation, and that was okay with me, since as a creator, Prince was master." In line with the control that Prince maintained over his band, this band rather, he also dictated the sartorial aesthetic. During his interview with Questlove Supreme, producer and former Time member Jimmy Jam states how the whole band was required to dress in this style by Prince, who wanted them to have a cool aspect that both showed respect and class by dressing well. As his fictional nemesis and comedic foil, Morris Day represents the exaggerated, macho yet refined extension of Prince as a caricature of the dandy. In the opening montage of Purple Rain, the viewer catches a glimpse of Day in preparation for his night out. He's caught vacuuming in boxers and an undershirt, and this really indicates a level of work entailed to fully embrace dandyism. After this scene, Day is never spotted without his impeccable suit, Stacey Adams wingtips, various dapper accessories, including canes, scarves, suspenders, rings, cufflinks, silk handkerchiefs, and even a handy mirror that materializes with the ever-present and delightful Jerome Benton. Originally a roadie for the band, Benton earned his spot as Day's personal valet by improvising the mirror bit during rehearsal of the song Cool, complementing Day's authentic comedic persona, complete with mockingly aristocratic voice gesture, turns of phrase, and subtle gesture, so the voice register, and all these characteristics are really part of how we understand the 19th century dandy. The misogyny in the films must be discussed, at least mentioned, particularly in the treatment of the female characters by Morris Day, does remain in line with Baudelaire's definition of the dandy in the 19th century. So Deborah Hook reminds us that while the dandy figure is known for his effeminate gesture and fastidious attention to his elegant appearance, he does not, quote, generally hold women in high regard. In Mon Coeur Mes Nus, Baudelaire demonstrates this virulent misogyny in his statement that women represent the contrast to the dandy because he views them as naturally beautiful and thus abominably vulgar creatures. So despite the deconstruction of gender expression exhibited in the dandy figure, Morris Day exemplifies the inherent complexity in the dandy's ostensible appropriation of aspects of traditional feminine appearance, whatever that means, while exhibiting hypermasculine behavior. So Morris Day in the Time's general uniform is most closely aligned with the zoot suit aesthetic. In her book on zoot suits, Kathy Pice summarizes the look as the long killer diller coat with a drape shape and wide shoulders, pants with pleats billowing out at the knees, so up to 40 inches in diameter, or in circumference, tightly tapered and then pegged at the ankles to even down to 10 inches, right? Pork pie or wide-brimmed hat, pointed or thick-soled shoes, and a long dangling keychain created by African-American men associated with racial and ethnic minorities, in particular Latinx men. We'll get to that in a second. And working class youth celebrated in the world of jitterbug, jive, and swing, condemned by government authorities seeking to conserve precious textiles for the war effort. Now, her analysis of this garment unlocks a multifaceted enigma surrounding its meaning, specifically who is talking about the zoot suit and what is their agenda. So Robin Kelly points out that, quote, zoot suiters appropriated, even mocked existing styles and re-inscribed them with new meanings drawn from shared memory and experience. And that ultimately one of the central attractions of the Zoot suiters was their collective refusal to be subservient. So while the 19th century definitions of European dandyism would most likely exclude the Zoot suit due to its excessive flamboyance, I believe it is an important example of Black dandyism in its creative appropriation of traditional colonial products, the three-piece suit, all the accessories that go with that, but also this audacity behind the young working class male minorities who sported the look in public, taking up space both visually and material in this radical way. That's really expressing cultural pride and a rejection of the imposed fashion codes of white society. So up until this point, for over a century, men's fashion was purposefully understated, intending a sign of power and no need to really show off to garner attention. But post-Great Depression, pre-World War II, male minorities started to break this rule with these flamboyant and colorful suits. So the wider the shoulders and pants, the better. Pice also posits that the actual origin of the Zoot suit occurred on the dance floor of the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, New York. So the Lindy Hop was a new dynamic partner dance at the time, set to big band swing music, and it required athleticism and agility at extremely fast tempos from the dancers. So this roomy cut of the jackets and the wide-legged pants allowed for mobility in the dance where other suit cuts would not last through the night. While the tapered or pegged ankles of the pants prevented the leaders from tripping and getting entangled with their partner in the circular and acrobatic movements of the dance. So I have a video of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. And let's see if we can get the sound right this time. So these guys were basically the most famous group of dancers at the time, dancing to Duke Ellington in this clip right here. And you can see this, the pants, the high-waisted pants, tapering at the ankles. And that's William Downs and I believe Francis Mickey Jones in this first clip here. And this is Billy Rickert and Norma Miller. And Norma Miller was the youngest member of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, and she just passed away about a year ago at almost the age of 100. And she's incredibly important as far as sharing the history of the dance and promoting the community up until she passed away, and never really leaving show business during that whole time. So she's a phenomenally important figure. And this is Frankie Manning and his partner, Ann Johnson. And you can really see his coat. He has that classic drape-shaped coat, the pants, and they're pretty short, actually. And he's also pretty much known for being the ambassador of Lindy Hop and basically inventing the idea of throwing the follower around. All right. Okay. So basically, the consumer-driven look was made to order or semi-custom tailoring, and many people also just improvised the style and shape by combining old clothes, hand-me-downs, and clothing bought a size or two too large. All right, so moving on, the symbolic power of the Zoot suit really sparked many debates at the time, ranging from a masking of masculinity, considered by some as effeminate and a deviance of gender and sexuality, to ideas that this symbolized youthful dissatisfaction or a means of self-expression available to minority and underprivileged youth. Langston Hughes at the time saw Zoot suiters as depression's kids, that it was exciting for them to go to extremes in fashion, and when they finally had a little money to spend, and in turn formed community amongst themselves through this style. The media denigrated it as an anti-patriotic symbol of fascism, as portrayed by Disney with this Donald Duck cartoon, supposedly due to the wasteful amount of fabric used in its confection during a period of wartime rationing, in addition to the alleged criminality they associated with the look. Yet versions of the Zoot suit were also worn by Zazus in France and swing youth in Germany, as you can see from the Swing Kids movie that came out in '93. So these were both youth countercultures in opposition to the Nazis. So of course that doesn't hold as a theory. This vilification of Zoot suiters in the US is of course directly linked to racism against young men of color, Blacks and Mexican Americans in particular, but Filipino and Japanese men also sported the look. On June 4th, 1943, 50 US sailors armed with makeshift weapons left their naval base to raid LA with the intention of inflicting violence upon young Mexican American men, and the Zoot suit itself was deemed a cause for what the media labeled as the Zoot suit riots. The violence lasted for 5 days, and police reports showed that many of the 94 injured civilians were not even wearing them, but all were Latinx, and most likely Mexican American. Blamed for igniting the violence, scores of these Mexican American youth were arrested compared to only 2 servicemen. While the Zoot suit at the time was associated with criminality and deviance by the racist media in a way to condemn this radicalized other as unpatriotic, the Zoot suit wearing Pachuco figure later became a symbol of pride for the Chicano community. And to this day, it is actually illegal to wear a Zoot suit in Los Angeles. In addition, this same year that the riot occurred in LA and 1 month before the 1943 riot in Harlem, Cab Calloway and the Nicholas brothers appeared in dandified dress in Stormy Weather. Pice points out that during a performance for Black soldiers before they went overseas, the film featured Calloway in an iconic Zoot suit in the opening number, followed by the penultimate piece, My Ain't That Something, with a chorus of Zoot suiters symbolically moving in harmony against the backdrop of the American dream, and thus countering this anti-patriotic association or unpatriotic association surrounding the article of clothing and its wearers. And much like the original Zoot suiters, members of the time would at first shop in thrift stores in order to find these styles, which prints required them to wear at all times, both on and off the stage, as we see depicted in both Purple Rain and later Graffiti Bridge. In these images, we see the similar suit cut, the long jacket, the double-breasted jacket with the iconic wide-legged and pegged pants, bright monochromatic or pinstripe suits, and the Stacey Adams shoes. Day tends to be the most flashy, of course, with his shiny gold and black jacket that evolves from a suit coat in the 80s on the left to more of a smoking jacket in the 90s. And we see him wear a monogrammed version of this while he's lounging around at home in Graffiti Bridge. He wears a similar look in the Shake performance, where he further demonstrates that the, quote, dandy lives and sleeps in front of a mirror, meaning he dresses up when he's wearing his bedclothes at home. Day plays with this trope by bringing his intimates to the stage and further demonstrating the constant performativity inherent in dandyism. And here we also see the same kind of jacket worn by Cab Calloway in the 1947 film Heidi Ho. Now, while the time had been wearing Zoot suit-inspired fashions during the early 80s, the Zoot suit made more prominent appearances in popular culture, specifically in music videos and movies in the late 80s and early 90s. We can see homage paid to these jazz-era styles in MC Hammer's Turn This Mother Out video from 1988, Paula Abdul and MC Scat Cat in Opposites Attract from 1989, which was my personal jam as a child. Janet Jackson's Control video, produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis in 1986, with the Time performing as backup band, as well as Zoot-suited dancers in the When I Think of You video, directed by Julian Temple from the same album. And finally, All Right, released off the Rhythm Nation 1814 album, which was also directed by Temple and produced by Jimmy Jam and Lewis. In addition, Janet chose to pay homage to aforementioned Zoot suit icon Cab Calloway, and you have some Cliff's Notes about him because he's a very incredibly important figure and just don't have time to go into it right now, but I think that there's, he really exemplifies Miller's definition of the dandy's use of wit and gesture, which is also reiterated in Day's presence both on and off the stage. And Day's first look in Graffiti Bridge is a yellow and burgundy ensemble by Helen Hyatt, inspired by the Zoot suit and reminiscent of Calloway's famous yellow look, complete with an embroidered cape and two-tone shoes. And of course, the Zoot suit was yet again appropriated by white culture during the neo-swing craze in the mid to late 90s, as shown in movies like The Mask and Swingers. But I believe that Janet wore it better. Okay, so this brings us to New Jack Swing. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of the song Nasty on Janet Jackson's first album, Control. This song is credited as the inspiration for Teddy Riley, or one of the inspirations for Teddy Riley and New Jack Swing. This new music genre in the late 80s and early 90s was defined through the innovative mixing of styles and specifically the use of swing beats on drum machines with R&B vocals on top. And along with the unique new sound came both a sartorial and kinetic aesthetic. So Zoot suits were often featured or at least referenced in clothing worn, and the dance moves exhibited similar quality of movement to vernacular jazz dance during the swing era. For example, got another clip of Whitey's again. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so this is Al Minns, and later you'll see Leon James. And this does take place in 1960 on the DuPont show, but they're performing vernacular jazz styles and showing different versions of the 20s or the 20s, 30s, 40s versions of the Charleston. And then we can fast forward a little bit where they dance together. Right, and then they do that quite a bit. So one of my favorite examples of the comparison to New Jack Swing style dancing is in the house party scene, right? This dance battle with Kid and Play and Tisha Campbell and AJ Johnson from 1990. Let me see if I can find the right spot. I know it's hard to skip over to this part, but you can see that Play is wearing a Zoot suit inspired look with two-tone shoes. Doesn't have the jacket on, but he does in other scenes. I could watch that all day. So the basic movements parallel the original Charleston with the low grounded stance, the supple bent knees, consistent pulsing, repeated kicking, and of course the running man. And the patented Kid and Play move even mirrors the 1920s Charleston basic step with the mashed potato footwork that had previously resurfaced during the 60s. Now these dances originated with jazz music with direct lineage to the roots of West African dances, and we can see examples of New Jack Swing dancing in the choreography of Tevin Campbell's Round and Round scene in Graffiti Bridge with the Game Boys. So why does this all matter? Through a cohesion of style, clothing, accessories, gesture, including dance and movement in public spaces, and wit, language, actions, visual subtleties, dandyism is about semiotics and performative signifying. The look behind Morris Day and the Time, as curated by Prince himself, is not only representative of these core values of dandyism, but also pays homage to a legacy of social and political rebellion through its adaptation of the Zoot suit aesthetic. In the same vein as the original dandy, Julius Soubise, whose claiming of public space and assertion of agency through sartorial rebellion has echoed throughout communities of color for 3 centuries, over 3 centuries, we saw last week hundreds of Black dandies led by stylist Gabriel M. Garman march through the streets of Harlem to protest police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, Prince and Morris Day's hometown, of course. These images remind us of one of the first civil rights protests in the US, the silent parade in Harlem in 1917, in which clothing was also a focal point. As Miller states, the dandy, and then, yes, I want to just end with Miller's words here. The dandy often surfaces during changing circumstances in history, quote, as a mode of creative appropriation that is not just the strategy of social critique, but, as we have seen, a mode of survival. Thank you.